Story 1. You are going to put yourself in an early grave trying to make your mother happy. She is sick. Trying to make her happy is like filling a bucket that has no bottom. It will not work unless she fixes the bucket. You cannot fix it for her. Story 2. I asked him, how do you process all of the negative feelings that are projected at you? And he said, they aren't my feelings. I don't think he realized how profound that was. Story 3. The way your parents died will never be the most interesting thing about you. It's not even the most interesting thing about them. My parents died by suicide together, and I worried it would consume me. I didn't want their deaths or my grief to become my entire identity. My brother feared he was doomed to repeat what our parents did and asked what the point of fighting it was. His therapist told him, "You are the culmination of millennia of genes and family experiences. You could take over the story of a relative who was hardy, resilient, and brave. Your parents are not the only people you are related to. Thank you for the support. I'm glad my therapist's words help others as much as they helped me. I'm doing well and my life is wonderful. As my therapist assured me, I have many more interesting things in my life. Talking openly about my parents, the good and the bad, both here and in real life, has been integral to my grief process, which will never end. I'm not trying to self-promote, but I did an Ask Me Anything about my experience, which was healing. I also recommend the Suicide Bereavement subreddit if you've lost someone to suicide and feel like you can't relate to anyone." Story 4. When I broke down because I was so fed up with being scared and anxious all the time, he said, "You can't be brave without being scared first." It always stuck with me that fear, no matter how overwhelming, won't last forever. And I try to see it as a chance to prove that I can fight back and get through it. Story 5. Not every friend has to be a close friend. You can have different kinds of friends at varying levels of closeness and trust. I struggled with being a loner, and it affected my mental health because I could count my friends on one hand. I thought of people as either acquaintances or close friends, with no gray area. This advice helped me appreciate people I am not close to but who still have a presence in my life. Story 6. Remember, you have survived 100% of your worst days so far. Story 7. Just because a person with a mental illness is screaming at you and lives in your home instead of on the streets does not mean their opinion is any more true. The fact that some relationships are involuntary does not mean you should hold them to a lower standard than voluntary ones. You can hold them to a higher standard. Story 8. One of my favorite moments was, if you are more active at night, do what you need to then. There is no rule that everything has to be done during the day. Of course, try to get a solid 8 hours of sleep, but when I have the opportunity, shift critical tasks to the middle of the night, when I am more productive and do my best work. Story 9. I told my therapist that, although I am still young, I felt it was too late to achieve what I wanted in life. She looked me in the eye and asked, "Are you dead?" I replied, "No." She said, "Then there is time." It is a motto I remind myself of every day. Story 10. The anxiety you are feeling is not evil or your enemy. It is an overprotective friend trying to keep you safe because it once saw you get hurt. Do not fight it. Prove it wrong. Story 11. As a teenager in therapy, I used to call myself a potato because I thought I was ugly. The woman I saw gave me a small plastic potato replica and had written on it in a Sharpie marker, "Some people like potatoes." Her effort to help and cheer me up changed how I viewed professional help. I was an angsty kid, and after that I took getting help much more seriously. Story 12. Some people are like a colander. No matter how much time, love, and support you pour into them, they will never be filled enough to make a difference. Story 13. The only people in your life who will be angry because you established boundaries are the people who benefited from you not having them in the first place. Story 14. Don't live as though the thing you fear has happened when it hasn't. Story 15. You need to show yourself the same kindness and compassion that you show others. I did not expect to get something like that in my second session. Story 16. This is a great thread. It is the best I have read in a while. Everyone sharing helpful things is both helping me and giving me solace. Story 17. Your friends should not make you cry. Pathetic that I needed to learn this in my 30s, but there it is. Story 18. I was more addicted to the breaks and deep breathing than to the nicotine. I have been smoke-free for over 1 year and watched my father die of lung cancer after a lifetime of smoking. Story 19. Your anxiety does not deserve to be ignored or dismissed. You should not always tell yourself it will be fine when you are anxious. That invalidates your feelings and buries them deeper. Tell yourself, maybe this will happen and maybe it will not, because that reflects reality. Life is full of uncertainty, and we need to find ways to accept it or we risk harming our mental health. Story 20. That being a highly sensitive person is just how I am built. It is not something that is wrong with me or something I necessarily have to change. I just have to accept it, learn my boundaries and needs, and live accordingly. She said to think of violets and sunflowers. Both are flowers but require different things. Violets cannot be transplanted and are more easily damaged, but they are beautiful. Sunflowers can be beaten up and moved around. They are resilient. One is not necessarily better than the other. They just are. I love my therapist. Story 21. Be the mirror, not the sponge. Don't absorb other people's stress and anxiety. Show it back to them gently. Changed my life. Story 22. As you become more educated and experienced, you will outgrow certain people and behaviors, and that will be uncomfortable. You will no longer fit in. Story 23. You don't need to please everyone all of the time. People who love you will not leave you because you disagree with them or do something they don't like. She traced many of my behaviors to the fact that my biological father left when I was 9 months old. I cannot cope with perceived abandonment and will do everything in my power to keep people happy because they might leave me. Story 24. After going to couples counseling for 6 months, one day my ex did not show up. He was an abusive alcoholic who was physically and verbally abusive. The therapist looked at me and said, "You do know he is never going to change." For some reason that made me realize I needed to move on. That was the 3rd time I filed for divorce. Soon after he remarried and divorced. He continued to hit rock bottom. He was fired for drinking on the job, his vehicle was repossessed, and now, at age 60, he lives with his parents. Some people never change. Story 25. You aren't that interesting. I used to have panic attacks and paranoia from post-traumatic stress disorder. I thought people were out to get me and that they were judging me in grocery stores when my toddler cried or my hair was messy. It came down to this. Most people are just trying to get through the day. They notice briefly and move on. They are unlikely to remember a momentary crying child or how I was dressed. The only person who will remember is me and how I made myself feel. Story 26. I had been in therapy for about a decade and was talking to my therapist about online dating. I said it was like being sucked into a whirlpool. There is only one small step between playing at the edges and being pulled in. She asked why I used that example, and I told her that when I was 9 I had been sucked into a whirlpool in a creek and only survived because my brother pulled me out. She began scribbling in her notebook more than I had seen before. The story also explained many things. Story 27. He showed up and scheduled daily appointments for a week, then twice a week, then weekly, and finally monthly, which he maintained until he retired. I had an undiagnosed disease that was devastating my life. Doctors, looking for horses not zebras, dismissed me as having nothing wrong and told me it was all psychological. Eventually, I became psychologically broken after years of not getting the medical help I needed. I had a suicide plan. Trying to get my affairs in order became a protective factor that kept me from acting on it. Later, I became impulsively suicidal and made an unconscious, impulsive suicide attempt. I desperately needed help. I went to a mental health clinic. They said I was beyond their resources and wanted to have me committed. I had 2 cats and had not arranged for my apartment. The idea of losing my cats, the remnants of my career, and my home by being committed did not make me less suicidal. I called a crisis hotline. The counselor stayed on the phone with me for much of his shift. He had me call a friend and collect my firearms and the items I had gathered for my plan, then call the hotline back or he would call me. He also arranged for me to meet a therapist the next morning. The therapist agreed to meet me in his office parking lot at 7 a.m. That therapist saved my life and kept me alive through years of therapy. During that time, an immunologist finally diagnosed my disease and began treatment. She also saved my life. It was not a single thing he said, but his compassion and commitment. Over the years, he taught me tools to manage my mental health and prevent relapse, though for years my brain remained wired to see suicide as a solution. Several people asked me to share the tools I learned to manage my mental health. I have answered that question elsewhere. Story 28. I told her that I was stuck in my job because I was not qualified to do anything else. She told me, "You were qualified to go back to school." I enrolled in classes at the local community college, which did indeed lead to a new career. Story 29. You deserve to take up space just as much as anyone. There was a whole process involved in allowing me to see my own self-worth. Story 30. The answer is simple. That does not mean it is easy, but it is simple. I did what I always do in difficult, scary situations I do not want to face head-on. I overthink and overcomplicate what I need to do to be happy. The answer was quite simple. I needed to tell my now ex-husband that I wanted a divorce. That statement made everything clear. I was scared and searching for a solution to ease that fear, but there was no way to make it less difficult. The answer was simple, and it was okay that it felt scary and hard. Story 31. You have to make yourself your first priority if you want to show up as your best self for the people you love. I did not really understand that at the time. How could I make myself my first priority when I believed I would be dooming my siblings to a childhood of religious and emotional abuse if I chose to prioritize myself? Eventually, I took the advice and moved out. I learned what happiness and safety feel like, and that I am worthy of love, including love from myself. I later returned to be there for my siblings, and they did not hold it against me. Our relationship is still good, and neither of them feels abandoned. A few months after I moved out, my mother asked how she could mend our relationship. I said I was not sure it was possible, but at the very least she needed to see a psychiatrist and get her explosive anger under control. She had to be a better mother to my siblings than she had been to me. Maybe then I would consider working on our relationship. She did see a psychiatrist. I have not been able to forgive her, nor have we repaired our relationship. We tried family therapy for a couple of months, but she kept talking over me and I felt unsafe, so I stopped attending. Even though my relationship with her did not improve, my siblings had the chance to spend the latter half of their childhood in a healthy, loving home. They have decent relationships with both parents and with me. I prioritized myself for the first time in my life, and suddenly my life improved, and so did the lives of the people I care about. I had believed that making life better for myself would condemn my siblings to a life of abuse with no trustworthy adults. Turned out to be the opposite. They gained 2 additional trusted adults because once my mother's explosive temper cooled, my father began spending more time at home and stopped being a workaholic. They have less money now than when I was younger, but they have more love and happiness. They all feel safer. All of this happened because I followed my therapist's advice and prioritized myself. Story 32. After abruptly leaving an abusive relationship where, among other things, I could only listen to music with headphones or I would be yelled at for being disrespectful and too loud, I learned that my life is my music and that I had been forced to mute myself both literally and as a person. It made me realize how much of myself I hid to try to appease someone else and make their life better when all it did was ruin mine. Over 3 years later, I play my music out loud with a different partner who loves it as much as I do. Story 33. Sorry, but you are just not that powerful. It was in response to my tendency to accept blame for everything that had gone wrong in my life and my children's lives. It should have been obvious to me, but it was not. When I processed this statement, I felt overwhelming relief. Story 34. One of the best ways to reduce cortisol is to scream, sing, or hum. Animals shake when their cortisol levels get too high to release it. The vagus nerve runs down the neck alongside the windpipe. Scream, sing, or hum. You will feel better. Guilt is a heavy and useless emotion. Put it down like a suitcase and walk away. Story 35. It sounds like they hurt you. Have you ever said out loud that your feelings were hurt? Story 36. You keep putting your bucket into the same empty well and expecting the bucket to be filled, and then you are devastated when it comes back empty. This helped me find peace with a mother who cannot show love and affection. What I learned was that I have many wells in my life that do fill my bucket, so why do I keep trying the empty one? It served me well for many years. Story 37. At our third couples counseling session, my wife and I had a brief 10-minute private meeting with the therapist. During the meeting, the therapist told me I needed to accept the possibility of divorce. She said I was trying to do the right thing and be supportive, but I could not do that alone and my wife was taking advantage of me. She added that I could not see how unhappy I was and that this would change within a year of the divorce. She was right. My wife and I agreed to divorce during the fourth session. I am finally happy and love my life. Story 38. I am reading these answers because I cannot afford therapy. Laughing out loud. Story 39. I sought therapy because I struggled with anger. My mother told me to think of something that calms me whenever I get angry. The only thing that calmed me was my mother, and she never knew. May God bless her. Story 40. Depression lies to you. The couch will still be in the same spot even after you go for a walk. Story 41. You didn't ask to be born, so maybe stop blaming yourself. Story 42. It took me over 3 years to work through the belief that I owed nothing to my parents. Story 43. What she did was abusive and not okay. You did not deserve that. I was made to think I was the problem in the marriage, and after describing the relationship, my therapist said this. Floodgates opened. Story 44. Bide your time has helped with my anxiety in many ways. It does not matter if that time is 2 minutes, 2 weeks, or 2 months. It is okay to not make a decision yet. I still use this, and it really relieves the pressure of having everything figured out in an instant. I can take 2 weeks to decide and not worry the entire time because I truly do not have to decide until that moment arrives. Usually, with more time and less pressure, the answer becomes obvious. Story 45. It wasn't in therapy, it was in a parenting class. The advice was to put the baby down. It seems simple, but when you have a screaming baby, you've tried to figure out what's wrong, invested a lot of effort in problem solving, and gotten no result. It's natural to want to double your efforts and try extra hard to solve the problem, but in reality there may be no solution. The baby is just crying. You can walk away, take a break, and try again in 5 minutes. You can apply this philosophy to many things in life. Story 46. I have a habit of berating myself and saying horrible things. My therapist said his next patient has many of the same issues I have and asked me to stay so I could tell the patient what a piece of shit he is. I said, why the fuck would I do that? That's horrible. He pointed out that I had a visceral reaction to the thought of verbally abusing a complete stranger, but I do it to myself every day. It helped me reach a place where I could see myself as someone who deserves compassion and grace, even from myself. Story 47. I'm a therapist. You know that phrase, you can't love someone until you love yourself? I tell my patients that's bullshit and replace it with, sometimes, through loving someone else, you can begin to love yourself. Story 48. School was pretty rough for me. When I was about 13, I had multiple uncontrollable public anxiety-related breakdowns. I was self-harming and contemplating suicide a lot. I got through it all out of sheer spite and anger, having to depend on myself and never being allowed to seek professional help. My parents told me that I was strong enough, that people have real problems, yours aren't a big deal, you have no reason to be depressed anyway. And also the classic, what would people think if they found out you were in therapy? They'd call you crazy. Years later, I started begging my mom to let me see a therapist, which eventually she did. I think it was because she viewed me as old enough to have actual problems or something. At the time, I blamed myself for almost everything that happened to me as a kid. I told my therapist, oh, I got bullied because I was a weirdo, I was too negative. I should have made a bigger effort to socialize. Stuff like that. I was going into detail regarding my biggest breakdown, again blaming myself when he just stopped me and asked, and where were the adults in this situation? And it all just clicked. There were so many signs, ever since I was little, obvious signs that I was different. I was a gifted kid. I had very specific special interests. I was always awkward and weird. I got picked on, I got left out, I never made many friends. And the adults did nothing. They let me spiral out of control. They never gave me any actual advice and never took me seriously. But they definitely pointed out that I was too sensitive, selfish, negative, uninviting, awkward, an overthinker, a spoiled brat. The truth is, all this time I was simply autistic, laughing my ass off. Story 49. A question she asked immediately changed the way I saw a relationship. How much more of this bullshit are you going to put up with? Story 50. You can feel sorry for your mother and still understand that what she did was never okay. I have long wrestled with my feelings about her, and that realization finally clicked in my head. Story 51. What would happen if you just didn't? This really made me look at my responses to stressful situations. What if I didn't immediately jump in to save my mom, dad, or brother? What if I didn't get angry and frustrated at X, Y, and Z? What if I didn't make other people's problems my problems? Holy cow. Changed my life. Story 52. This summer, I went from very fit to couch-ridden after a severe injury. I was doing a virtual session with my therapist and complaining about how useless I felt, and my dogs were sitting with me, so I said I was more useless around the house than they are. My therapist asked what my dogs bring into my life. Easy. Joy, humor, companionship, fun, loyalty, and more. My therapist then asked, do you not bring any of those things into your spouse, friends, and family's lives? That pretty much instantly ended my shame spiral. Story 53. Just because you were hurt when you were younger does not mean strangers have the right to hurt you now. Story 54. A relationship is like a seesaw. If the other person does not want to participate, you can keep going, but you will get really tired. Story 55. A friend told me her therapist said there is not enough information to panic yet. Whenever I catch myself spiraling about the unknown, I try to remember that. Story 56. It wasn't my therapist. It was my doctor, and it was life-changing. I had been over 300 pounds all of my adult life, and I went in for a physical. He said to me, the first symptom of a heart attack is a heart attack. That statement caused me to change my life at age 54. I lost 110 pounds in 16 months and became a runner. I have run a race in all 50 states, 26 half marathons, and 2 full marathons, Chicago and Boston. That one thing he said to me kicked off my decision for better health. That was 15 years ago. Story 57. First therapist. Your parents do not get to decide what kind of relationship you have with your brother. That was the first big breakthrough of many. It is obvious, but it had literally never occurred to me before. Second therapist. Have you ever been evaluated for autism? I have to tell you, this makes a lot more sense now. Story 58. No one can tell you what you need. Only you can tell yourself what you need. For example, you need to listen to me more becomes I need you to listen more. You need to grow up becomes I need you to grow up. Express to others what you need. Do not tell people what they need. Story 59. You cannot control the choices or actions of anyone else. What you can control is how you respond. This freed me then and continues to free me whenever I need to remember it. Story 60. Not from a therapist, but I feel it belongs here. I read a book once that introduced me to the concept of the near enemy. It is a Buddhist concept used in psychiatry. It opened my eyes to things that had always bugged me and gave me a framework for understanding why people are the way they are. The near enemy is a psychological concept. 2 emotions that look the same but are actually opposite. Pity and compassion are the easiest to understand. Compassion involves empathy. You see the stricken person as an equal. Pity does not. If you pity someone, you feel superior. It looks like compassion and acts like compassion, but it is actually the opposite. As long as pity is in place, there is no room for compassion. And love and attachment, that includes friendships, marriages, mothers and children, any intimate relationship. Love wants the best for others, to let them live wherever they want and do what makes them happy. Attachment takes hostages. Finally, equanimity and indifference. I think that is the worst of the near enemies, the most corrosive. Equanimity is balance. When something overwhelming happens in our lives, we feel it strongly, but we also have the ability to overcome it, to accept things and move on. The near enemy is indifference. They just do not feel pain. They do not care about others. They do not feel like the rest of us. They are like the invisible man, wrapped in the trappings of humanity, but beneath there is emptiness. The quote is from Louise Penny's novel The Cruelest Month. I apologize for not attributing it earlier. I have read all her books and highly recommend them. Story 61. From a book written by a therapist. The difference between setting a boundary and being controlling is subtle but still very clear-cut. Saying, you need to quit smoking is controlling. Saying, I don't want you smoking in my house is a boundary. Story 62. It was pointed out to me that I perform well in crisis situations but struggle immensely with situations that are only mildly uncomfortable or unpleasant. So much so that I will have what was lovingly called a hissy fit. I was first a critical care nurse and am now a psychiatric nurse practitioner. Crisis is where I thrive. But put me in a situation where I must tolerate mild discomfort, and I will say no thank you. Having this pointed out was life-changing. I have been working on my mental toughness and my ability to tolerate situations that are mildly unpleasant but certainly are not life-threatening. People such as athletes and soldiers amaze me. They have a very high tolerance for mild to moderate discomfort and an uncanny ability to tune out unpleasantness and keep going. Also known as being mentally tough, they do not need the adrenaline of a crisis to thrive. That is what I am working on improving in myself. I have made great strides, but I will not lie. I still become cranky and overly dramatic at times when situations are mildly unpleasant or inconvenient. I need to remind myself to dial it down, draw on my inner mental toughness, and remember that no one has ever died from being mildly inconvenienced. Story 63. The more you try to make someone like you, the less likely they are to, because you are trying to pull them away from something they hold dear, also known as their dislike of you. Let them dislike you and remain neutral toward them. They are much more likely to come around if it is on their own terms. Story 64. This was more than 20 years ago, before the term boundaries became common. She was the only therapist who actually helped me. She told me I had no boundaries with others because mine were never respected. That blew my mind, and since then boundaries have been a recurring theme in my thoughts. I have good boundaries now for myself and for others. Story 65. Everyone is the main character of their own life. Don't take someone else's choices personally. Story 66. She asked why I was working in such an extroverted job when I am clearly an introvert. If it is so draining and taxing, why do you do it? She asked. I could only say that I was good at it. She replied, at what cost? Can you be good at other things that do not exhaust you so much? I went to school for accounting, quit my teaching job, and now have a peaceful hybrid desk job. I am much happier. I sleep better, eat better, stopped grinding my teeth, and my stress acne disappeared. I am a whole new person. Story 67. Do you want someone like that taking care of you if you have a stroke or a life-changing circumstance? Story 68. In grief counseling, I felt overwhelming guilt because when their father died, I completely lost it. I felt I was not there enough for my children. My therapist said, when the airplane is going down, you put your mask on first. This is no different. You cannot help your children until you have helped yourself. It was a huge turning point for all of us. Story 69. It wasn't something she said, but something she did. She cried with me, not sobbing, just a few tears, and it felt validating. What I was going through was so fucked up that my therapist cried, and that gave me the strength I needed to end my shitty marriage. Story 70. Obsessive-compulsive disorder therapy is a little different from traditional therapy. I described to my therapist all the things the disorder requires me to do during my daily routine. She said, if this were regular therapy and if you were a minor describing these things as something your parents require, I would be required to call Child Protective Services for abuse. That put into perspective how different my life is from people who do not suffer from obsessive-compulsive disorder and motivated me in my recovery. Story 71. When you realize that this relationship will never be what you want it to be, you will be able to let go. Story 72. Other people may have experienced worse trauma, but that doesn't mean yours is any less valid. Story 73. The fact that you are not an alcoholic, a drug user, or addicted to anything is practically a miracle. What you had was the Vietnam of childhoods. I had been told my whole life by people I trusted that all families are crazy, so I thought my family life was normal. It was not. It was awful. Story 74. She did the same thing repeatedly. What are you going to do? Story 75. Why are you continuing to give your abuser access to you? He cheated and moved on, destroying your mental health. No matter what he tells you, he does not need or want you. He wants what you give him. That is how narcissists operate. They drain your joy and, when they stop getting it, discard you and move on to the next victim. Shut him out and let yourself heal. He does not deserve you, and you do not deserve to be abused. He will not change. It is time to move on and grieve the person you loved. He is gone to you now. Story 76. When I was young and had a lot of social anxiety as a college student, I thought of social interactions as experiments. You meet someone, it goes well or poorly. You learn something either way, and you have another chance next time. Story 77. Of course your parents have not gone to therapy. You are their therapist. Mind blown. Setting boundaries after that got a lot easier. Story 78. Closure is a luxury. It's great if you get it, but most of the time you just have to let go and move on. Story 79. I was struggling with a need to nurture something. My children have gotten older, and I felt like I needed a puppy or kitten to care for. She said, why not try taking that energy and nurturing yourself? Story 80. I struggled because I kept remembering negative events and could not recall happy memories. I was distraught. He said that happy memories do not help you survive. Bad memories do because they teach you what not to do. He advised that if you have a good laugh or a pleasant memory, write it in your phone. I now have a notes app full of happy memories that I look at when I'm having a tough time. Story 81. You can have two completely opposing thoughts regarding the same topic, and both can be valid and true. You don't have to be on one side or the other. It's healthier to consider all viewpoints. Story 82. I'm a hospital chaplain. I was worried that I didn't care enough because I'm able to relax, have fun with friends, and enjoy myself despite the extreme tragedy I experience at work. She asked what would happen if I did spend all my time thinking about and grieving my patients. Then she said, would the suffering stop? It was powerful to hear and really changed how I view my work and career. Story 83. What if, instead of always being in control, you just be? Story 84. Maybe you feel this way not because of depression but because your life just seems to suck. Story 85. As a psychologist who works with patients, I see people report either good or terrible experiences with therapy on this Reddit thread. I want to remind everyone that the best predictor of success in therapy is the answer to the question, do I like the person I am talking to? If the answer is no, the chance of success drops significantly. If you have tried therapy before and it did not work, it may have been a poor fit. Try again. You are worth trying for. Story 86. Me. I have reached a new level of reduced anxiety. I've never felt this calm before. Therapist. There are about 10 more levels before we reach a healthy state. Me. Surprised. Story 87. I have been struggling with a terrible boss at work. They were underqualified, immature, abusive, gaslighting, and manipulative. After about a year in therapy, my therapist said one sentence that changed everything. You still see your boss as a person. About 24 hours later, with that sentence repeating on a loop in my head, I realized my boss had never seen me as a person. That helped me see that what was happening was real and harmful, so I went to human resources. They took it seriously and stepped in to help. Story 88. Not everyone has to like each other. Some people do not mesh, and that is okay and normal. Story 89. I don't have anything to share, but seeing the answers in this thread made me tear up at the realization that there is still so much hope in the healing process. Sometimes that hope comes from a simple sentence. Story 90. I'm nervous about work tomorrow, and I know I can handle it. My whole nervous system just calms right the fuck down. It's magic. Story 91. Either way, you are making a choice. And you do get to choose. I was very religious and trapped in an abusive marriage. I believed I could not leave because I thought the marital bond was unbreakable, and that leaving would automatically condemn me to hell since I would be consciously choosing something so wrong. My therapist was a Christian, and I think he nudged me to stay, not because I lacked a choice but because he wanted me to feel that I had chosen to stay. When I finally realized and understood that I did have a choice and was not powerless, I chose to leave. My life has improved exponentially. Story 92. Neglect is a form of abuse. I thought that since my parents clothed me, fed me, sometimes took me to the doctor, gave me money when I desperately needed it, and did not hurt or assault me, I could not have been abused. Hearing that parents are supposed to fulfill more than just survival needs was an eye-opening experience. I initially dismissed it, but then it hit me like a ton of bricks that she was right. Everyone, children especially, needs more than basic survival needs being met. You need people in your life who you can depend on, who make you feel safe, who are present and engaged, and who do not make you grovel or feel guilty for every scrap of food or modicum of affection begrudgingly bestowed on you. Never having a moment when you feel safe, can relax, or can count on someone else leads to growing up anxious, poor at relationships, poor at advocating for yourself, and unable to see yourself as worthy of love, respect, or success. You are taught from an early age that your wants and needs do not matter, so it becomes easier to have none. Story 93. For whatever reason, your family just did not love you. It happens a lot. Just cut the ties that bind and set me free. Story 94. I had to grieve the person I would have been without my mental illness, accept my diagnosis, and continue treatment to get better. I wasted more than 10 years refusing medication and therapy because I did not want to believe I had bipolar disorder. When I finally accepted it, my real life started. Story 95. I always worry that if I talk about something or think about it, I will jinx myself. He told me, "You are not that powerful." Story 96. When you obsess and imagine bad outcomes, you put yourself through the situation twice. Most of the time, the scenario you imagine will not happen. Do not believe the lies your mind tells you. Story 97. The same therapist drilled two concepts into my head that changed the way I think. You cannot control what others do. You can only control how you respond. When trying to understand my dad and my childhood, you cannot understand or rationalize a psychopath. You will never understand or relate. Story 98. That's what avoidant people do. For context, my ex and I were in couples therapy because I felt like I was going crazy over her actions. She ghosted me after we split, after 5 years together, no contact and no closure. I told her this, and that was her response. It clicked that she was indeed an avoidant person. She avoided all responsibility for any wrongdoing and did not want to grow as a person. The best thing my therapist ever said to me. Story 99. After repeated sexual abuse as a child, therapists kept saying, "You did nothing wrong." But all I heard was, "You did nothing." I continued to blame myself until one therapist said, "Nothing you did caused it, and nothing you could have done would have stopped it." I finally realized that, as a child, I truly was powerless. That was when the healing started. Story 100. Showering, washing your hair, and brushing your teeth entail many steps. You are already very burnt out, and with your attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and autism causing executive dysfunction, these tasks become overwhelming. Beating yourself up for not being able to handle that level of self-care does not help and does not get you closer to doing better. Here are other things you can do to help with maintenance until you can work your way back to regular functioning. I now have disposable toothbrushes, baby wipes, and dry shampoo for when things get bad or I am in more physical pain than usual. Story 101. She asked me to strip away the labels. Sister, daughter, fiancé, friend, editor, writer, volunteer, liberal, feminist, runner. Take them all away. What's left? I said, nothing. She said, no, it's you. You are smart and funny and loving and weird and silly and many other things. The you who does nothing but exist has inherent self-worth. And it clicked. I finally stopped believing I was only as good as the things I could do or accomplish. Story 102. Man, one day my therapist was trying to get through my defenses and just said, "You are worthy. You are worthy of love." I am a grown-ass father of two and I just lost my shit and sobbed. It was such a weird feeling, and I was surprised it hit me that hard. I have been with that therapist for over 2 years now, and she has saved my life. Story 103. That's an explanation, not an excuse. I used it to describe my severely mentally ill sister's behavior. I still repeat that sentence all the time. Just because someone has problems does not give them an excuse to be an asshole. Story 104. Just because I feel hurt, it does not mean that someone else caused it. Story 105. Explaining to me that it is not normal to spend a good portion of your life depressed and to walk around pretending to be happy, and that this is not what everyone is doing. Story 106. If you did something you feel guilty about, it is okay. You can apologize and change if you want. If someone else did something that makes you feel guilty, remember, it is not your fault. Your version of love is climbing over a wall and believing there will be safety and comfort on the other side. Her version of love is watching you run and claw at the wall she keeps building as it grows taller. She wants you to fail. It is your choice, but most people do not survive that kind of love. Story 107. You're like a radio. When you're tuned to one frequency, you attract people on that frequency. If you want to attract different people, change yourself. Story 108. I was stuck in a loop about why my family treats me so poorly. My therapist told me, if a snake bites you, you don't chase after the snake, trying to reason with it by asking why it hurt you. It hurt you. You make sure it doesn't happen again. It helped me get unstuck. Story 109. When I was 14, I spent 6 months in a long-term mental hospital. As part of the program, you had to earn points every day by doing basic things to level up. Reaching level 5 meant discharge. These tasks included going to group, keeping your room clean, and eating 3 meals a day. During my stay, I often refused to participate, which meant I did not earn points. I would just sit and not go to group, see my therapist, or go to meals. Toward the end of my stay, I worked hard to discharge and go home. In a therapy session, I argued that I was ready because I had not refused in a week. My therapist told me I needed to be consistent. When I asked how long I needed to be consistent, she looked me in the eye and said, "Do you hear yourself?" I realized then that I was treating it like a formula. I was not trying to make a lasting change. I was putting on a show to prove I could do what they wanted. Story 110. In grief therapy after losing my father, I commented to my therapist about crying in public. He said that if someone has a problem with you crying, that is their problem, not yours. Story 111. 20 years ago, a therapist told me that most people with my background are institutionalized in one way or another and that I was very high-functioning considering everything. Bless that therapist. He said out loud that what people did to me was wrong and that I had beaten the odds. It felt like a red carpet had been rolled out and I walked down it to accept a sense of self-esteem. Story 112. She asked me one day what my goals for our sessions were because she thought we were not making any progress. She said she perceived I was hungover or possibly intoxicated at our evening sessions. At the time, I knew I had a problem with drinking for years but did not want to address it. She forced me to confront that and my unmedicated depression. I began the process of quitting drinking and have been sober for 7.5 years. I also acknowledged that I needed help managing attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and depression. It is not fixed, but I am very grateful for her candor. Story 113. I grew up as a gifted child. I am aware of the privilege that comes with it, and I'm thankful for it. It also came with huge burnouts, stress, and intense pressure to meet expectations I never had a say in setting. I was in a session with my therapist and he said, "You're not supposed to know what you are doing. You're not supposed to know what you want. You shouldn't know what your life should look like. That's the entire point of being alive. You go through different stages until you find your purpose. It's not some big philosophical race to find the meaning of life. Your purpose could be as simple as smiling at a stranger. That person decides to stay another day, and 50 years later, their grandchild finds the cure for cancer. You can't think too deeply into life because that's not what we are supposed to do with our time. It will just drive you insane because we aren't meant to know our reason for being alive. With that said, just do what makes you happy. Take classes you enjoy, not just what will make you rich. Talk to people who make you happy. Work jobs you find rewarding. At the end of the day, a person who loves their life is so much richer than a billionaire. If you enjoy something, follow it. If you love someone, keep them in your life. If someone makes you happier, allow change to take place. You are your own person. You don't need to be what your parents, peers, teachers, or mentors think you should be. Are you capable of all those things? Of course you are. But is that what you actually want? You have been told your entire life you're special, smart, and beautiful. That's all true, but being those things doesn't mean you have to live a particular type of life. The only expectations you need to meet are your own. If the people in your life truly love you, they will support whatever makes you happy. You have the potential to be great is the most backhanded compliment you can receive. You are already great. Now decide what being great means to you. It's all up to you. You don't owe anyone anything. It's your life. Do what makes you feel like you lived out your purpose. Not everyone's purpose is a career and a family. Live a life you can lie on your deathbed and say to yourself, I did good. That's all that really matters. I remember it word for word. It changed absolutely everything. Story 114. Not from therapy, but here are 3 I love. Stop going to the hardware store for milk. I heard this twice this week. Once in an agony aunt column, probably Slate or the Washington Post, and again in the season finale of Hacks. It is brilliant. Your mental health is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Marcus Parks, last podcast on the left. People are not thinking about you the way you are thinking about you. Alexis Rose. Story 115. Honestly, I used to think the Enneagram was just a trendy gimmick. In the hands of a psychotherapist, it is a powerful instruction manual for yourself. Story 116. You are allowed to be the main character of your own story. Story 117. Quit crossing oceans for people who wouldn't jump over a puddle for you. Story 118. Listen to the words he used. Who is going to take over the world when I die? It feels like that to some of us sometimes. Doesn't it? Story 119. The person with the least investment in a relationship has the most control. This changed my life. Story 120. He called me something that would translate to quirky or original. Up until then, I had always felt I had to mask my true self because I was a little different from others. I didn't even realize the difference was what people liked about me in the first place. Story 121. Anything worth doing is worth doing badly. Meaning, don't refrain from doing what you love because you don't think you're good enough. Story 122. You shouldn't speak with your mother. It was something I wanted to do for many years but never felt right about because of societal norms and a desire to set an example for my younger brother. I even tried to get her to attend therapy with me, but she refused, saying I would try to expose her. When I finally heard someone say what I had been thinking, I was overwhelmed. I took that advice and cut all communication with my mother 4 years ago. Since then, I have experienced a marked improvement in my mental health and have been able to stop abusing alcohol and drugs. I still drink, but not nearly as much as I used to. Story 123. The problem is never the person. Story 124. I heard this from someone who was complaining to her therapist about her life. I hate where I live. I do not like any job I have because of my parents' example, she said. The therapist replied, I understand. So what are you going to do about it? She became livid. Didn't you hear what I said? My parents did this and that. I grew up like that. And now I live in this awful place with this awful job. The therapist repeated, So what are you going to do about it? They went in circles until she was about to walk out. Finally it sank in and she says it changed her life. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.